Thank you, Ambassador Shah. It's a delight to be here in this very large auditorium with so many young students. It's a wonderful campus. I had the pleasure of coming here last year, but it's really one is getting to know how important this institution is and what kind of a marvelous job the Symbiosis has done in expanding and modernizing the Indian education sector. So it's a real privilege to be associated with this. What I thought I'll do is really to tell the story of India security policy to the Indian Ocean around 4 dates. I think looking at those 4 particular dates should give us a sense of where we are coming from in terms of what India's approach to the security of the Indian Ocean is and where it might be headed. The first date I want to refer to is around the end of the Second World War. That is in the mid-1940s, 1945, the war came to an end and India's independence seemed near. So at that point, many Indian nationalists began to think about what kind of a defense policy does India need? How would independent India deal with the security around the world? And within that, of course, the question of Navy was an interesting one because the Indians were not running the Royal Navy. That one of the things that we inherited from the British Raj was the Royal Navy, that is the British Navy, was so powerful. It had seen off all the adversaries, the European adversaries in the Indian Ocean, and that the Indian Ocean was called the British Lake. Now, so therefore the British took care of the maritime security, and it was the Indian Army that provided the sinews for security all across the Indian Ocean littoral. For example, in the First World War, there were 1 million Indian soldiers, and in the second, 2 million Indian soldiers who participated and contributed to the victory of the Allies in the Second World War. Yet there's no naval component to India's security policy at that point of time. That was taken care of by someone else. So the Indian nationalists, especially 2 gentlemen, we don't often remember them. One was Mr. Panikkar, Sardar K.M. Panikkar. Other was Keshav Balakrishnan Vaidya, who's from this part of the world. The 2 of them had an expansive imagination of how India should strengthen and build a modern navy. A strong Indian navy that would contribute to the security of India, contribute to the regional security in the Indian Ocean, provide support to the weaker states, and to establish good governance and in the entire Indian Ocean space. But yet, these ideas of these 2 gentlemen, Panikkar and Vaidya, did not come to pass because of a number of reasons, which saw India really not pay attention to the seas despite having a long coastline and of having great maritime aspirations. Now, the 3-4 factors created India's separation from the seas. One was India's economy turned increasingly inward. That is, if you're not interested in imports and exports, if you're emphasizing self-reliance, you have no business going into the seas. So therefore, India was a globalized India in the mid of the 20th century. As it turned towards self-reliance, it did not have much use for seas. The second factor that changed, that limited India's engagement with the sea was the partition of India and the creation of Pakistan and creation of new borders in the subcontinent, and China's entry into Tibet meant the land conflicts became the dominant form of our Indian security, and India had little time to think about the seas, and the whole focus became of defending the new frontiers with Pakistan and with China. The situation changes only in 1991 when India really turns to the seas, because India's economic orientation changed fundamentally with the economic reforms of 1991. So therefore, the India which unwilling to turn to the seas in the 50s, and again in the 60s when the British left the Indian Ocean with the East of Suez policy, India declared that, look, we're not interested in a role for ourselves. We don't believe in the theory of power vacuum. All we need is a UN resolution. A lot of people love UN resolutions. Ambassador Shah served in the UN. But a talking shop is no substitute for power politics. In fact, the talking shop reflects the reality of power politics. So the 67, the grand Indian illusion that you could actually have a resolution to convert Indian Ocean into a zone of peace would take care of all the problems. It was this self-deception of India in the 60s that saw India not step up to the plate when the British vacated the Indian Ocean and handed over the responsibilities to the United States. So therefore, what you had in 45 was the economic reorientation pulled us away from the seas. 67, you had a second opportunity when India could have stepped up and said, look, we want to take responsibility for the Indian Ocean. We did not. It was 1991, the third date, that things began to change. Because the economic reform of India, its opening up of its economy, created a greater interdependence with the world. India's total two-way trade at the turn of the 1990s was around $30 billion. Total annual two-way trade was around $30 billion. Today it's close to $1 trillion. That is $1,000 billion that we do every year. That's nearly 40% of India's GDP. That is 40% of your GDP or national economic activity is linked to the rest of the world, and much of this relationship is done through the seas because thanks to Pakistan, we can't do much over land, or thanks to China too. So therefore, the seas today, post-1991, have become central to our welfare, central to our prospects, central to our future, and once your economy is so dependent on the seas, it's inevitable that India would turn to the maritime domain. And the ideas that Vaidya and Panikkar talked about in the 1990s have slowly come back to say India must return to the oceans. Today, oceans are central to our future. Therefore, India needs a strong navy. India needs a maritime policy. India needs a maritime strategy. All these came back only with the economic transformation that took place. While the economic transformation took place, the political hesitations of India remained. How far should it go to work with other navies? Must India be a lone ranger? Should it stick to the UN resolutions? Must India remain non-aligned? Mr. Ramadhav was asking this morning. Non-aligned meant you had no military relationship with anyone. So the old ideas that India inherited from 1947 remain the political ideas. India must remain non-aligned, support UN resolutions, and that you can't do much with the Americans or the British or someone else. These ideas limited on the security side what India could do in 1991. But today, for the first time, under the present government, today there is a far more assertive sense that India needs to do more for its own security. And Mr. Modi's speech in Mauritius last year, I think, was the first speech, in fact, in many decades, where India has articulated a maritime strategy, and that strategy, I would say, essentially involves three elements. One, to build a strong maritime capabilities for India. Two, that India would assist the smaller countries to build their naval capabilities, their maritime capabilities. And third, that India is ready to work with other powers. Each one of them was a significant departure from the past, because in the past, most of the resources went into the Army and the Air Force, and the Navy did not get many resources. And we've seen some increase in the Navy. There's a longer distance to go. Second is today, India has more capabilities to help other countries, for example, Mauritius, Seychelles, or other countries, to give capabilities to assist them in managing their own exclusive economic zones, etc. That policy too has evolved. It is a third aspect, which is where today India was reluctant to engage the United States or other major powers. Today India is willing to be partners with US, with Japan, with Australia, with Singapore, a whole lot of countries that India is prepared to work with them. This is a big shift from being a lone ranger, Ekla Chalore, whatever, if any Bengalis will know. I mean, that is actually saying, I'm alone, I won't touch anyone, I won't cooperate with anyone. Lee Kuan Yew is famously supposed to have said, India was a big tree, but did not give any shade to anyone else. This idea that India, big, has a lot of strengths, but was not going to help other countries, move away from that today to one of consciously asserting its willingness to help other countries, and ready to partner and build coalitions with countries like the United States. Where does that leave us vis-a-vis China? I think it's quite clear. China is going to be in the Indian Ocean. Like all the Western powers that came from the West, China is coming from the East. China is the second largest economy, as the second largest military power, will have significant presence in the Indian Ocean. The question for us is not to say that is good or bad. The question is, what is our strategy to deal with the fundamental change that is taking place in the distribution of power within the Indian Ocean? This, I believe, requires, one, a much faster pace of strengthening India's own capabilities. Second, to create enough capabilities within the country to assist other countries. India still does not sell many arms, does not have the domestic defense industrial base to help other countries, but I think it will need to do a lot more in the coming days. And finally, you have to work with other countries. Working with other countries does not mean you losing your non-alignment or your strategic autonomy. Working with the others is about strengthening your capacity, improving India's force projection capacity, of creating the ability within India to be able to contribute to collective security in the Indian Ocean region. And I think that is the challenge. I think in all the three fronts, we've said the right things, but we've got to do a lot more in actually translating these goals into specific outcomes on national capabilities, on creating institutional mechanisms to work with others. And I think that is going to be the biggest challenge. But in terms of the ideas, we've made that move, moving away from non-alignment, moving away from an insular, isolated policy towards one of regional engagement. But the challenge is now of implementing that policy in an effective manner. So, sir, let me stop you here and thank you for the attention.